I'll start in 2004 instead of 2008, because I was employed at Vestas in 2003, December. And at that time, I had a vision or an idea. Is it possible to find the set of personal characteristics that actually defines performance? If you could crack that nut, it would be beautiful, right? Any HR manager would love it, that you could look for this. And I'm going to give you a kind of response. I'm not going to go deep in it, and you're not going to get details. Unfortunately, when I'm back here, we can share my experience if anyone has questions. But as I have left Vestas now and have my own small company, amongst others talking to Flemming, it's limited what I can tell you about the actual findings in Vestas. If you want that, I can give you some names you could contact. But apart from that, what does great look like? When you start to wonder what it looks like, you will have to have some basic data. So after the merger between Vestas and Micon, I simply decided to test all managers. That was a bit scary for the managers, at least. Nobody actually protested, so we tested everyone. We choose one test, we chose one company to cooperate with because I wanted a steadiness and sustainability in the numbers and the interpretation of numbers. That was quite interesting. We tried to correlate the findings. We looked into a lot of areas. This is some of them. We tried then, when we were finished testing all leaders, to try to look at, are there some correlations between results and the test results? There was, but we could not really say anything significant about it, as our performance management systems at that time was not that well developed. So what do? You develop a performance management system with KPIs, so you can measure the results in each department on a lot of areas, and then you start to look at it. We also measured all leaders in this performance management system. We measured all leaders' performance. We also measured their potential, but that's a bit irrelevant here. But we measured their performance in a performance matrix based on a lot of data, P&L results, leader results from surveys, customer surveys. All of that was taken into consideration in the evaluation of each and every leader at Vestas. Then we got a bit wiser. Then we talked to the developer of the test systems we had, and we tried to change that up against what we were looking for and our findings. So now we started actually to test leaders up against what we found. Just to give you some, I think any statistician would love this one. It says something about the correlation between factors, and it's very, very close. But actually what we found here, when we looked at it, was that motivation and satisfaction is the strongest driver of performance. So we were looking, we could bring that back and say we're going to look for leaders that are capable of ensuring that their department or their entire function actually have a high degree of satisfaction and motivation. And you can see it's not for debate. You can see what satisfaction and motivation means for the numbers. And now we were so lucky, we were also measuring customer loyalty, we were measuring absence, we were measuring performance in the performance matrix and the numbers, so we could see what does it actually mean to have a high degree of satisfaction and motivation. Not too high. For your information, we also found out there's a level you can go to, and don't go higher because that's very expensive and doesn't bring very much. The other thing that we unfortunately were so fortunate to have was different situations in Vestas. Now, Everyone knows what I call the adventure at Vestas, where we had growth rates of CARC at 28%. Employing a turnover was impressive. At that time, you all know that, back in the zeros. Around 20% turnover, and a growth of 28% meant basically that half of our employees had less than 2 years of experience at all times. So to us, it was also crucial at that time to find what are the drivers for performance. Now, we also had a downturn. I think most of you are aware of that. At least the papers were kind enough to elaborate on that topic for almost every month during this period of time. And we also then managed to get in control at that time. And that is actually what we call the success. That's where Vestas is today. And I think most of you know that, even though the share price, if you study that, fluctuate a bit, but it had always done so. It has basically nothing to do with a steady performance right here. Now, were there any leaders that during these 3 areas, or you could say the adventure, the crunch, and the success, were there any leaders that had a sustainable performance? That is very interesting, because normally you say, well, people are good at either growth or the opposite. And it takes a set of quite another skill set to do growth compared to do restructuring of a company. Might be so. But basically, we found that some of those we had leaders, a lot of leaders with sustainable performance during the entire period. That was interesting, because that says something about, there must be some personal characteristics that actually defines how good you are, and that your performance is actually sustainable if you are good. That's also to me, it was very interesting to look into. So, what does it actually look like? To give you a flavor of it, I would say that there are some characteristics that are crucial for building satisfaction, motivation, and in that way also building performance. You have to be robust and self-confident. You have to be open for new ideas. You have to listen. You have to have a holistic view on the world. You have to have a personal drive. You have to be trustworthy. And you have to have a natural curiosity and a drive. Now, you can always discuss to which extent these things actually drive the performance, or is it a sustainable performance, or are you a high potential that can actually bring it further on. It depends on the scores of the various factors that you see up there. That was very interesting to find out. And when you're working with 3,000 leaders, what you find out is, I think you can say the validity in the results are quite high. So, we started to look for these things. We built our tests around these things. Also looking for more, because it might change. Don't believe you found the Holy Grail and the right answers to anything. You have to doubt your own answers at a constant basis. You have to test it. But this is actually quite sustainable over the period of time that you saw the adventure, the crunch, and the success. So, if you look at that, one of the things that when you study intelligence, actually could conclude is that the social intelligence is by far the strongest driver for performance. It's not the intelligence that we know, that we can calculate, that we can find out things and we can solve problems. It's actually the social intelligence. If you are, and we could also see that in the test, because we also had what we call traditional intelligence tests, that if you are average intelligent, but have a high score on the social intelligence, the likelihood of you becoming a success and driving the performance to a high level in an organization is very high. If you're really bright and also have the social intelligence, you can drive it even further. But if you don't have the social intelligence and are extremely bright, we can see your performance or your organization's performance is not that high as if we have the other picture. So, basically you can say, if you focus on social intelligence and a bit more, not just social intelligence, but the main conclusion is that social intelligence is by far the best driver and guarantee for performance in an organization. It was very interesting to tell the sales organization that these young guys they had that were very loud and very visible were not those who created the best results. I think that was, in a sales organization at least, somewhat of an aha experience. That was what we found. Then you always have to say, now we know what drives performance, what actually drives sustainable performance. And the next thing is, how do we ensure that these guys always are on top of what's happening? Because we are, and I think Fleming said it very nicely, we are in a world that is developing very fast. Globalization, I know we have an American president that says globalization is not that big a thing. It's more my country first. But globalization has come to stay. It means more competition, faster development, because there's a lot of brains out there that come up with a lot of new stuff that we didn't think they would. Just look at the Chinese. They make gigantic development steps. They simply skip part of the development phase we've been through and they take the next level. So it's much faster out there. So how do we ensure, as companies, that people develop fast enough? And that's a very good question to an HR director, because then he can chew his pencil and think, how I'm going to do that. I'm going to build a very big learning organization that ensures that we are on top of that. The problem with that is, and I agree to Fleming, it's very slow. The other thing is, they basically don't know. I mean, how would an HR learning expert know what a lawyer would need to know dealing with China? He doesn't, or she doesn't. The only one who knows what he needs or she needs is the lawyer dealing with China, because they find out where they have gaps in their knowledge in order to ensure that they can do an efficient deal. I mean, if we build on the fact that nobody goes to work to destroy anything, but everyone goes to work to build something and to become a success, I mean, people want to know. If they have the personal characteristics we talked about, they don't want anyone to come and tell them what they should know. They find out themselves. They're very self-driven, and they want to define their own future. So, that was one part of it. The other part of it is there's also knowledge that they have to know as a company. So how do you deliver that? And when you find out that at least I think Denmark is the most developed country when it comes to technique, IT, and we have everything available. The technology is present to learn in another way. The technology is present to communicate in another way. And most of the young leaders at least, They don't need a cup of coffee and a discussion. They need an SMS text that tells them something. So if you provide people with the right tools that actually challenge them and make sure that they are aware of what they need to do, I think that's important because we're all very, very busy. So we seem to get lost when it comes to look at how we develop. We are so busy doing what we need to do on a daily basis. So you have to be challenged. You have to be woken up at times in order to understand that now you have to take the next step. Apart from that, people want to take the next step. You can build it into their careers. So actually, when I was at Vestas, I was starting wondering, how could I move learning, the responsibility for learning, from HR to the individual? So much easier. We couldn't do it. We couldn't just say that we did it. We tried it because we had to during the crunch. We just stopped all training. Apart from a few vital training programs, what legally was required and what we thought was supporting the leadership in understanding their roles. Apart from that, no training. The interesting thing was at that time that the score for development did not decline. Interesting. So how can we do that? People took actually charge, as Fleming expresses it, for their own development. It's not that we didn't develop people. They actually just took charge of it themselves. They understood there was not too much money. They also understood that the learning management system we were in, they were looking in that, finding out what they could actually support them in their own development at that point of time. But there was no challenge. There was no wake-up call saying, now you have to do it. And what do you have to do exactly? So then I met Fleming after what, 4 years, Fleming? 8? And then Fleming had the exact same thoughts. So he came up with a solution and told me about it, and I thought that might be very, very interesting to work with, because it actually had the structure that gave people the wake-up call, that helped them find out, that supported them in their struggle for their own development. And I thought that was really, really, at that time, very great. I still think that, because when we look at the world, the individual demands, if you want, at least now we're talking about leaders and successful leaders, you have to adapt very fast to change, which means you have to learn very fast. And you have to do it on an individual basis because the world is so specialized as it is. So, doing that right, being on top of it, creates synergies in my world. And that would be, for me, if I still been at Vestas, the next natural step to actually make the employees take charge of their own development, based on the technology available. Thank you.